Thank you. I made the rookie mistake in preparing my presentation of not keeping a copy of my submission pitch. So what I've done will be a little different. And I should also stress this has nothing to do with my day job. This is what I do for fun. No secret squirrels were harmed in the making of this presentation. So part of what I'm wondering is, before this conference, who had actually heard of Megagames? Right, not very many, but I did note that Richard talked about them earlier, which made me very happy. I'll be touching on some of the same themes that he introduced. So I'm going to try and get through the sort of history stuff as quickly as I can, and then get on to the meat of talking about problems in game design, or, colossal mistakes I've made in my designs. So this is about 90 seconds from a game done
every
2 years ago.
The satellites have stopped working. Every satellite remains in orbit, but you can get no signal from them. They have all stopped working. So the rules for no satellite cover apply. Everybody takes a PR loss. The world is in uproar, and so terror tracks go up because people can't get their phone systems or their sat-nav. All of that stopped working. I don't want to worry you or anything.
With all of the world's satellites offline, panic begins to increase and military forces are weakened. Despite the confusion, the USA and Canada continue their plan to welcome the aliens to a cultural meeting and send an ambassador to the extraterrestrial visitors for talks.
They're landing where they've been told to land.
They're landing at the Alien Cultural Exchange Centre on the US-Canada-Canadian border.
Excellent.
But before the aliens arrive, another important meeting is taking place.
We were just discussing our view of the extraterrestrials, and I was explaining that the US position is that as of yet we don't have enough information to make a firm conclusion about whether they're hostile or not. We've not been on the receiving end of any hostile action, and therefore I'm not willing to commit the US to a war against people who may be potentially peaceful. But we note with concern the activity in Antarctic and also overflights in South America. In particular, we were concerned about the reporting.
So that goes on for... There's another hour or so of footage of that particular game up there, but you saw an example there of control running in the game, changing the information state in reaction to what the players had done. That feeds into what the players are doing at the map, and then people take that map state information away and they're role-playing about what the meaning of all that is. And I usually start trying to explain Megagames by saying that it's a mashup of board games and live-action role-playing. There's a couple of other quotes up there. The middle one is something I saw on Facebook last month that resonated with me. The one at the bottom is from a collaborative group in the UK who have been doing these kind of games for about 30 years, and that's where most of the world knowledge is at the moment about how to do these games well. Here's another example from a game of Watch the Skies. This is the press team in the game making in-game newsletters, reacting to the game events, and then going out with their news sheets and pushing the players who are playing politicians to react. And of course, all of the reporters want to scoop the alien story as fast as possible, and the politicians don't want the news to break at all. Jim Wallman is probably the foremost writer, proponent of Megagames out there at the moment, and he's written a series of blog posts where he basically goes, these are the key features of Megagames. The more of this you've got in a game, the more likely it is to be a megagame, but it's still very much more of an art than a science. And some of you may recognize this particular map. The designer, Becky, so she got to run a game set in Westeros in the reign of Mad King Aerys, about 15 years before the books, called Everybody Dies. She's running a sequel today over in the UK, which is called Everybody Dies Harder. And what we're seeing at the moment is, with the success of Watch the Skies is there's a lot of new designers, lots of experimentation, people trying new things. Whereas back in the 1980s, where this kind of started with military historians and wargamers taking what were professional wargame approaches to a hobby audience, and they were often doing operational level wargames, say 30 people refighting Operation Market Garden, or my own personal inspiration, a refight of the invasion of France in 1940 called Springtime for Adolf, where everybody started on a desk in a big hall, and once your unit started retreating, you had to leave your desk and its phone behind. And according to the article I read, once you started using company runners to carry your messages around, they were secretly told by control, every 7th message, screw it up and throw it away. And that was recreating the friction of battlefields in the game. They didn't tell the players that they were doing that. But my own game that I ran here in Wellington this year was Giant Robots and Eldritch Monsters in Ancient Atlantis. And so that scene there just emphasizes the board game element. There are monsters, the giant robots. The wooden domino pieces are the triremes and hoplite forces. And that had about 30 people taking part. But Watch the Skies is basically the breakout hit of Megagames, and it riffs off Aliens, UFOs, X-Files, XCOM pop culture. It was popularized by a video blog by a group that normally focuses on board games called Shut Up and Sit Down. And so now, much to the designer's surprise, he's basically selling a copy of the game every day around the world. And that made him about £30 a kit, times 300 is, well, not very much money. So the designers are doing this for the love, not because it's a good career option. And I did, in my pitch, call it a massively multiplayer board game. So that's a crowd shot of all of the players at the game that I showed that video clip from. I think there's probably over 200 people there. And with that many people, you know, every player adds inherent complexity to the game. So yes, part of that popularity, the Facebook group of people who like these games has about 1,500 people on it. Last year at Gen Con, the tickets for Watch the Skies sold out in the first 45 minutes, and they were priced at $56 US each, I think. But you're paying for something that is an all-day experience there. Later this year, people are trying a coordinated Megagame in 12 cities at the same time. And in August, I'm taking part in the first international Megagame collective at Gen Con, where we're going to try and have 4 days at Gen Con running these kinds of games. So getting into more of the design issues, I picked 4 topics. The first one is I called narrative privilege, and I summarized that as who gets to decide what happens next in the game fiction. And different games will have different sort of balances. In the old school sort of 1970s tabletop role-playing games, the game master, who would be down in the control choice box, had enormous authority over what was happening in the game state. Players could try anything, but the game master could go, no, this is what the outcome of you rolling a 20 on the dice actually means. And there was an explicit rule 0. The group could just throw away any part of the game system they didn't like and do their own thing. So for Megagames, I had a go at trying to draw my own sort of picture here. And the player choice element is really big. Largely the designers aren't writing a scripted outcome or end state. You are playing the game and seeing what comes out of it. The game system does act as some constraint. I think the talk this morning that talked about embracing the limitations. That reminded me of Brandon Sanderson's second law of magic, which is limitations are more interesting than power. A wizard who can do absolutely anything is an incredibly boring character to play. So you do want some frameworks in place to give the players meaningful choices, And then over the top, you have the control, who are there to manage the game, not to be masters. They're regulating it. And an example of me making a mistake that I had to live with in a game design was my first version of Colossus of Atlantis about 5 years ago. I gave the players an Athenian-style democracy to play with, and I really hoped that they wouldn't break it until at least halfway through the game. We had an elective dictatorship by stealth put in power in the first turn. And this really upset a couple of the players. And they came to me and said, "Your control, you should do something." And I thought about it, and it was a really hard choice, but I said, no. This is what the rules were. Everything the players have done has been within that rule framework, and 2/3 of you guys voted for this. So you've got to live with this choice. And as a designer, I've of course failed a little bit, and I have to go away and think about how I make my next game a little more resilient. But many mega games will let players attempt anything that could be done in real life. And in the UK, it's sometimes called a wizard wheeze. You go up to control and you say, "Hey, look, this fortress is really strong. If I besiege it, well, that's terrible. My army could die of the plague. What if I just give some guys some coins and they try and climb over the side of the walls with a ladder late one night?" And the game master will go, "Okay, I'll go away and roll a dice and I'll come back and tell you whether it works or not." But players can just come up with this kind of stuff in game and run with it. One of the first games I ran 20 odd years ago, a player came up to me and said, "Hey, this squiggle on the map which reads 'Here be dragons,' are there really dragons?" I hadn't thought about this when designing the game, so I responded, "I can neither confirm nor deny the presence of dragons in the kingdom." The player smiled at me and ran away and told every other player in the game that there were dragons, that he controlled them, and for a fee he could make sure they did not intervene in the Civil War. All of the other players then immediately came to me and said, "Dillon, are there dragons?" And I said, "I can neither confirm nor deny the presence of dragons in the kingdom." The only way to playtest a mega game is to run it. You just can't get 200 people together for a playtest, or 40. I can get like 5 around my kitchen table to playtest sub-mechanics or subsystems, but it's very much an art. I really hope when I run it that it doesn't fall over on the day. So I'm usually in the corner in turn 2 having a cup of tea, just watching everybody have fun, hopefully. That's my best case scenario. And my Goldilocks spot is there enough to keep all the players engaged in the game without them or the people helping manage it being overwhelmed? And because I'm very much running manual games with cardboard counters and dice and almost no computer assistance, I really have to keep the options in like the combat system really fine-tuned. Anything more than about 5 things to choose from and people will just freeze up because they don't know what's good or not. And when I did playtesting for Colossus of Atlantis, I really wanted a 20-minute game turn, but I had so much stuff in the map turn, particularly the combat resolution, that I had to increase the map game from at least 10 minutes to 15 minutes. And the first turn I had to double the length of the whole game turn for a teaching phase, so that everyone had lots of time, because as much as people might get a PDF copy of the rules 2 weeks ahead of time, you can't assume the players have read the rules. Some players will read everything. You know those people who really like winning Magic the Gathering? I have to design rules that can cope with them and at the same time cope with the player who turns up who goes, I left my rules at home, I haven't read them, what do I do? So that's one of Control's role in this game, is giving advice to players, just a little nudge and steer that, you know, it's okay for them to go and try stuff. The game state. I describe Megagames as having asymmetric distribution of the game state information. And that video clip, it had all of the noise and hubbub. There's 200 people wandering around. It's 200 sets of information. everyone's got different perspectives. And unlike a... Oh, that tells me I'm pretty much out of time. So I will try and quickly wrap up. So yeah, a lot of the game emerges after it's finished, when people are telling stories to each other in the bar. That's an example of just the clutter of one board game run in the UK, which was a scenario about a civil war in the 1930s. Game state information. I spend most of my design time thinking about how do I simply and easily communicate a change in the game. And my preferred solutions now are very much, I want as much of it facing the players as possible. I want their hands on the dice, and I can get away with this in a manual game system because, you know, they see that they've got 6 units, they roll 6 dice, they can see the mistakes, they can improve from them as they iterate through the later game turns. And with hundreds of players, you've got to have simultaneous resolution mechanics. You can't have the traditional board game of I go, you go, they go, gets back around to me eventually. And one of the other contemporary debates in megagame design is, do we actually need victory conditions or victory points? And that quote from Jim Wallman is sort of the traditional school of you give people objectives, they work towards them, they make up the stories later on. People coming from modern board game design very much want explicit victory conditions. They struggle a bit if you just leave it up in the air. And in Colossus, what I did was players could chase wealth, the teams were chasing political status, but the collective goal was to not score enough doom points that Atlantis would sink. And I was kind of surprised, but Atlantis didn't sink in my last game. And that's a couple of games I'm hoping to run in Wellington over the next year or so. And you can come and talk to me about them later if you're interested. And there's some more sources and further reading for people who are interested. So thank you.